The video you are about to see is an account of the tragedy that befell a screenwriter and his enterprising attorney in the mid-90s. Hoping to recover the money they lost to the Mafia 20 years prior, the duo produced a sequel to the classic film that defined their careers. That sequel went on to become one of the most bizarre films in the annals of American horror. Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. This September marks the 30th anniversary of Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation's original release. I say original release because, like Morbius, it kind of has to, and also like Morbius, flopped both times. The title is a bit of a mouthful. This is the fourth Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, so I will often default to calling it simply Part 4. Those of you following along at home, feel free to call it TCM TNG if you prefer. Despite this movie turning 30, nobody is really talking about it. I think that's because it's a classic example of what I like to call a black sheep sequel. Almost every slasher movie franchise has one. A sequel that introduces new elements, disregards franchise continuity, and generally does whatever it can to piss off the fans. As a rule, these movies are controversial upon release, but often attract legions of fans years later.
You are all my children now. Freddy's Revenge.
But that hasn't happened for this movie. The Next Generation hit theaters at an absolute low point for the slasher genre. The major franchises that defined this genre in the 70s and 80s had totally burned themselves out by the early 90s. Freddy was dead, Jason was in hell, and Halloween left off on a cliffhanger. Scream would revive the genre, but not until 1996. The old world was dying, the new world had yet to be born. It was the time of flops. In the midst of this era, Part 4 brought some desperately needed fresh ideas and some promising new actors in the form of Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger. It should have been the next big thing in horror. So why wasn't it? Well, it's kind of a disaster. On top of that, it was tangled up in organized crime, insane conspiracy theories, and something even more nefarious: Hollywood politics. So am I going to spend this video defending this movie, or tearing it to shreds?
A little from column A, a little from column B.
While researching this video, I relied on a variety of sources, but the main one was definitely the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Companion by Stefania Warzin. I hope I'm saying that right. This book is an excellent resource on the making of the first 4 films, featuring interviews with the cast and crew and lots of behind-the-scenes details. I highly recommend it if you want to learn more about this franchise.
Area residents have reportedly converged on the cemetery, fearing the remains of relatives have been removed. No suspects are in custody.
We first met Leatherface and his cannibal family in 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, written by Tobe Hooper, who also directed, and Kim Henkel. For such a big movie, it had very small beginnings. Hooper and Henkel shot the film outside Austin in the summer of 1973 with a crew of film students from the University of Texas. Adjusted for inflation, they were working with a budget of about $1 million, most of which was sourced from local investors. To attract those investors, they unfortunately had to sell off partial ownership in the movie as it was still being made. As a result, no single entity owned the movie outright, so the owners were collectively represented by a trustee, a lawyer who was appointed to negotiate on their behalf and ensure everyone was getting paid. There's a bunch of legal snafu we'll get into later, but the important part is that when the time came to make Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, it was a very different process.
One of those boys sawed his own head off going 90 miles per hour.
The trustee entered into a sequel agreement with Cannon Films. If you like bad movies, especially bad movies from the 1980s, you probably know the name Cannon. If not, allow me to explain. Cannon was an obscure, struggling American production company until it was bought out by 2 Israeli dudes in 1979. Over the next decade, they turned it into a trash factory, pumping out Chuck Norris movies, Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, and Death Wish 2 through 4, before going bankrupt. Cannon did occasionally work with great filmmakers, though. Great filmmakers like Tobe Hooper. Hooper came back to direct Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 as the final film in a 3-picture deal with Cannon. With the same director on board, you might think the sequel would recapture what people loved about the original. You'd be wrong.
Boys, boys, boys.
With a bigger budget, Part 2 loses the raw documentary feel of the original in favor of slick production values. Gone are the rotting little houses replaced by big, expensive sets. This is the Hollywood version of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Hooper was also in a different phase of his career. Understandably, he didn't want to make a carbon copy of the first movie. He felt audiences overlooked the dark comedy aspects of the original and was determined not to let that happen again. As a result, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is a very silly movie.
Hey, lick my plate, you dog dick!
It doesn't have quite the same classic status as the original, but a lot of fans have warmed up to it, and today it's often regarded as the one true sequel. After canon came New Line Cinema. They were hoping to make an ongoing series out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as they had with Nightmare on Elm Street. Hooper was briefly involved in the development process. After he moved on, Henkel came on board, but neither had any input in the final film. According to Henkel, New Line had its own vision for the franchise, and he was just wasting his time by trying to steer it in another direction. The absence of the two men that define this franchise is noticeable. The first film is a horrifying avant-garde masterpiece. The second is a funny slapstick gorefest. And the third is a pretty decent slasher movie. This is the first installment that made no attempt to challenge the audience. In a way, Part 3 feels even more like a Hollywood production than Part 2. They didn't even shoot it in Texas. This is California. Part 3 was a disappointment, and New Line gave up on the franchise. For a brief moment, it looked like Texas Chainsaw Massacre might remain nothing more than a horribly disjointed trilogy.
All right.
After Part 3 tanked the franchise, Part 4 was essentially a soft reboot. Hooper sat this one out, but Kim Henkel came back to not only write, but also direct. In the summer of 1993, almost exactly 20 years after the original was filmed, Henkel and Company shot Part 4 outside Austin in remarkably similar conditions. The budget was a fraction of what they had on Parts 2 and 3, but if you adjust for inflation, it wasn't much bigger than the budget of the original movie. Years later, Zellweger recalled the production cramming makeup, hair, and wardrobe into a Winnebago owned by the producer. They actually did the exact same thing during filming in 1973, which means there's at least a chance they used the same motorhome for both movies.
August 18th, 1973.
Right off the bat, we get a reference to two minor yet apparently related incidents that have transpired since the first movie. We're not necessarily pretending Parts 2 and 3 didn't happen, but I think this is essentially Henkel's tongue-in-cheek way of telling us those movies don't really matter. You can skip from 1 to 4 and not miss anything important in between. At one point in the Blu-ray featurettes for this movie, production designer Deborah Pastor even refers to it as the second one. Pastor seems to regard the original movie with a sort of reverence, as though it were a sacred text.
First thing I did was watch the first Chainsaw again, and then I watched all the other ones that came after it, made mental notes of what I would not do. Things did not need to be all fresh and pretty and well lit, and props did not need to be clean.
She even went to the trouble of tracking down one of the bone chair props from the original production, which was still owned by someone in the area. That chair was reused for the production of Part 4, and Pastor was incredibly careful not to damage it. This element of recreation goes well beyond just the look of the movie. We're treated to the same basic setup as the first movie, with hapless young people driving around rural Texas until they have an unfortunate run-in with violent lunatics. The film even acknowledges how predictable this all is, with the character Heather constantly talking about how she and her friends are going to die.
I had these dreams about some weirdo following me through the woods, and it's coming true.
Yeah.
Sorry, but we're all gonna die.
And we get one of my least favorite tropes from sequels and remakes, characters repeating famous lines from previous movies.
Look what your brother did to this door.
Look what your brother did to that door!
Terminator 2 gets a pass, but otherwise this move almost never works. As it turns out, Heather was right to be concerned. The movie continues retracing the plot of the original almost beat for beat. After the kids are picked off one by one, the last survivor goes for help, but the Good Samaritan she turns to is revealed as part of the killer family. She's brought back to the house for a grisly dinner scene featuring the family's impossibly old grandpa, and then something really weird happens. The action grinds to a halt when this guy arrives and admonishes the killers for doing a bad job.
You are here for one reason, and one reason only.
This isn't the kind of thing that happens in a slasher movie. It's more like a Monty Python sketch.
No, this is silly. What's silly? No, the whole premise is silly and it's very badly written.
Apparently, these people work for this stiff in a suit. And who does he work for?
I really shouldn't be telling you this, but you know how you always hear these stories about these people who run everything, but nobody knows who they are, right? Well, it's true. I mean, I never would have believed it, but it's all true. I mean, who do you think killed Kennedy?
See, these aren't the impoverished backwoods freaks of the first three movies. They're actually contractors for the Illuminati, or the New World Order, or whatever you want to call them.
It's very simple. I want these people to know the meaning of horror.
Henkel has since clarified that he didn't mean for this to be accepted as unambiguous fact. None of these characters are to be trusted, which should go without saying. In his opinion, this guy may very well just be a small-time cult leader who's pretending to be part of the Illuminati, and these idiots don't know the difference. Nothing in the movie contradicts the Illuminati angle, though, so people generally accept it at face value. And honestly, it's pretty weird to reveal the Illuminati is pulling the strings if that's not actually the case. To understand why this movie takes such a sharp left turn, we need to go deeper into how it got made. When we talk about the people responsible for making movies, we usually mean directors, writers, producers, actors. It's easy to overlook the critical element of lawyers.
I move for a bad court thingy.
You mean a mistrial?
Yeah. That's why you're the judge and I'm the law-talking guy.
The lawyer.
Right.
What was that?
Cut.
Cut.
I think we had a sound problem.
We got it right, finally. And somebody's hunting deer.
Henkel wrote and directed Part 4, but he's not the one that really made it happen. No, the real power behind the throne was a guy most fans have never heard of. Texas-based attorney Robert Kuhn. Kuhn got into this franchise on the ground floor. He was the attorney who helped Hooper and Henkel incorporate their production company. He must have seen something in these filmmakers because he became one of the first investors in the movie, making him one of many people who owned a piece of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Remember that motorhome from earlier? That was Kuhn's. That lawyer who served as trustee of the franchise? Also Kuhn. But someone must not have been happy with that arrangement. Kuhn was removed as trustee by a 1981 court order and replaced with attorney Chuck Grigson. That order was amended 2 years later, giving Grigson additional authority to enter into sequel agreements. That's how we got parts 2 and 3. Kuhn had no say in getting those made. But he did play one other really important role in the franchise that I haven't mentioned yet. Once Texas Chainsaw Massacre was in the can, the owners sold the distribution rights to Bryanston Pictures. Bryanston was kind of a rising new player in the film industry. They had distributed such films as Flesh for Frankenstein, Deep Throat, and that porno starring Sylvester Stallone. Beneath that sleazy exterior, there was something much worse going on. Bryanston was secretly run by associates of the Colombo crime family. In case you didn't catch that, that means Texas Chainsaw Massacre was technically distributed by the New York Mafia. In modern terms, this is like finding out A24 is secretly run by crypto scammers. Even as Bryanston was publicly celebrating this movie as a big win for them, they were underreporting its profits to the filmmakers. The numbers were not adding up, so the owners of the film hired Kuhn to sue Bryanston for the money they were owed. Unfortunately, the owners of Bryanston were ultimately busted for completely unrelated crimes, the company went bankrupt, and none of the people they owed ever got paid. In today's money, Texas Chainsaw Massacre made over $200 million. That's a conservative estimate, by the way. We don't know how much money this movie actually made upon release, and we probably never will. The people I feel worst for in this situation are the ones who deferred their pay in exchange for a cut of the profits that never came. They worked hard on this movie, under grueling conditions, and it's a crime they never got what they were promised. But let's spare a thought for the lawyer as well. Kuhn invested in a local rinky-dink film production that beat the odds and became one of the biggest movies in the world. And he walked away almost empty-handed. Kuhn would have sat with those feelings for almost 20 years when he approached the other guy who'd also been cut out of the franchise, Kim Henkel. But when he pitched the idea for another sequel, Henkel didn't want anything to do with it. As Henkel explains in The Companion, I was interested in directing, but I wasn't interested in directing this particular film. In his quotes from The Companion, Henkel seems a bit ambivalent about the horror genre, despite being associated with it for most of his career. Kuhn persisted and eventually won out. He and Henkel pooled their resources and licensed the property from Chuck Grigson, the attorney who'd held the trusteeship since 1981. Kuhn and Henkel did not make this movie because they had a great idea. They were just trying to make back the money that had been stolen from them in 1974. I can't blame them for that, but I think their motives do explain why this movie turned out the way it did. This is the kind of sequel you make if you don't think a sequel should be made in the first place. I don't mean that Henkel half-assed this movie, but rather that his disinterest in making it might explain why this movie ends up looking less like a sequel and more like a totally different thing that skinned the original movie and is wearing its face as a mask. From its opening minutes, Part 4 is dropping hints that it's not as simple as you might think, and I don't just mean the logo on the tow truck. You can see this weird self-aware streak in Heather's fixation on her own impending death.
Sorry, but we're all gonna die.
This isn't really Heather talking to her friends. It's the filmmakers talking through her, to us, acknowledging their movie is formulaic and predictable, and that's by design. In the making of documentary, Henkel outright states that he developed the characters based on teen stereotypes, hence the nerd, the bimbo, the stoner, and the jock.
It's bad for you to get all worked up and then not get it. You can get prostate cancer. Is that what you want?
That's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot.
And then there's Rothman, the Illuminati handler who shows up at the end. To him, the events we've been watching are a travesty that falls short of the visceral, enlightening experience he intended. He almost sounds like a critic.
All this, it's been an abomination.
Is Rothman somehow aware that he's in a bad horror movie and is critiquing the movie in which he exists? Or is this possibly an author insert, and Kim Henkel is saying, sorry guys, this one got away from me?
You really must accept my sincere apologies. It was supposed to be a spiritual experience. I can't tell you how disappointed I am.
If that's the case, does that make this movie any better or worse, or does it just not make a difference? Whatever you think of it, this movie should be regarded as an early example of meta-commentary in the slasher genre. To me, this indicates that Scream may have been the movie that popularized the meta-slasher, but this was an inevitable next step for the genre. For all its faults, you gotta admit this movie is interesting. And hey, at least the filmmakers didn't get screwed over this time, right? Right? As on the original film, Henkel and Kuhn planned to produce the film themselves, then sell the distribution rights to another company. Preferably one not run by the mob. The film was completed sometime in 1994 and showed at several film festivals in 95 under the original title, The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. For years, there's been a lot of confusion around the release of this movie. In The Companion, Kuhn and Henkel assert the film never saw an actual theatrical release in 1995, just a weekend of test screenings in select markets with little to no promotion. However, I think there's an important clarification to be made here. These were not test screenings as we think of them today. They weren't asking attendees to evaluate an early cut of the movie, and there was nothing secret or private about this process. Newspaper ads from the time indicate these screenings were open to the general public. These screenings even led to reviews published in several local papers. The companion states these test screenings took place in August, but the reviews date them to September. So did the filmmakers get the date wrong, or were there two separate rounds of screenings? One thing's for sure, this was not a wide release. The film might have played in as few as 4 cities. Sometime after the screenings, the filmmakers secured a distribution deal with Columbia TriStar. According to Kuhn, the film was set for a July 1996 release. But something unexpected happened from there. Zellweger and McConaughey were just obscure working actors in Texas when they shot the movie. But the release was dragged out for so long, they were well on their way to becoming celebrities by the time it was ready to be released. In theory, they hit the jackpot by casting nobodies on the cheap just before they became bankable stars. According to Kuhn, Columbia was going to hold the movie until after the release of Jerry Maguire, which featured Zellweger in a major role. The theory was they could take advantage of a big movie like Jerry Maguire to draw more people to their little horror movie. Kuhn says Columbia told him it was delaying the release until January 1997. When that date came and went, Columbia's lawyer assured him they would still honor the deal.
Slow down, please. I wasn't doing anything. I don't know what you're so pissed off about.
Barry, I saw you. You were kissing her.
Once! I kissed her once! What's wrong with that?
By this point, the filmmakers started suspecting McConaughey and Zellweger might be embarrassed of their association with the movie. Perhaps, they thought, these stars were using their newfound leverage in Hollywood to pressure Columbia into burying it entirely. Chuck Grigson, the franchise trustee, sued Kuhn and Henkel for breach of contract because the lack of release meant the people he represented weren't getting paid. Kuhn and Henkel must have gotten Grigson to see things their way because he dropped that suit later that year and joined them in suing McConaughey and his representatives at Creative Artists Agency. Together, they alleged that McConaughey and his representatives were interfering with the Columbia contract. It just so happens the Columbia contract is my favorite Robert Ludlum novel. In the end, Columbia changed the title to The Next Generation and dumped the movie in just 23 theaters nationwide. It's not really fair to call this movie a flop because it never got a chance in the first place. Internet lore has taken the accusations against McConaughey and Zellweger and accepted them as fact. These old rumors came back in 2018 when both actors' likenesses were removed from the Blu-ray box art. Scream Factory, the Blu-ray's distributor, stated the alteration was due to licensing issues. So did these two stars conspire to kill this movie? I'm not so sure. Both of them denied these rumors at the time and have even spoken fondly about this movie in retrospect.
And Kim was like, that was good. And the girl was like, yeah, that was really good. You really scared me. And then Kim goes, do you want the part? And I was like, yeah, I'll take the part.
However, that does not rule out the possibility that somebody from their agency pressured Columbia without their knowledge. It wouldn't be the first time a Hollywood agent advocated for their client by doing something behind their back. Regardless of who you blame here, you do have to feel for Henkel and Kuhn after they got ripped off twice.
Vilmer has some minor scarification and tattooing, but nothing like Rothman's. Piercings and warty protuberances.
What do you mean it's got warty protuberances? What the hell is a warty?
There's a lot of different ways to interpret Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It could be commenting on anything from the 1970s energy crisis to the ethics of eating meat. I think it's about all that stuff, but I'd argue there's one theme that stands above the rest. The breakdown of trust in American society. There's a reason people stopped hitchhiking. When you get in someone's car or let them in yours, you're assuming they are a safe person. But if you hear enough stories about a driver killing a hitchhiker or vice versa, you stop feeling safe.
I heard about an old man once, picked up a little girl on the side of the road, chopped both her arms off, stuffed her in the culvert, left her for dead.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is about the moment you stop feeling safe. When you realize the people around you don't see you as fully human. If you're not careful, you could end up on a plate with a side of potato salad. The sequel's up to the gore, but no amount of blood and guts could be more shocking than that revelation. So Part 4 expanded on that theme rather than just repeating it. It suggests there's some design behind this apparent chaos. That someone is benefiting as Americans size each other up and lick their chops. For me, however, this conspiracy angle falls flat. Whenever I hear these grand narratives about shadowy cabals, I'm reminded of The Onion's take on QAnon. a conspiracy theory that posits world leaders are secretly evil rather than openly so. Still, it's worth noting the bad guys don't usually look like Leatherface. They look like Rothman. Ironically, the element that salvages this movie may be the same thing that buried it. Zellweger is a great final girl. At the time, she was one of the best the horror genre had produced in years. She's the only character in this movie that feels like a real person. The theatrical cut does her character a disservice by removing a scene where she's harassed by her stepfather. In that scene, we learn she's been putting up with abuse for years. With that in mind, it's even more satisfying to see her fight back against her tormentors. And how about those tormentors? McConaughey is constantly stealing the scene in this movie. You can tell this guy is going places. It's hard not to focus on these stars, but let's not overlook Joe Stevens as the shockingly cultured W.E.
Among other evils that being unarmed brings you, it causes you to be despised. That's Niccolo Machiavelli. Now get!
Tony Parensky also makes a big impression as Darla.
Please don't hit me. Don't!
The movie really gets its sense of identity from the army of young and unknown contributors who are just happy to be on a film set. Their excitement comes through in all the behind-the-scenes footage and interviews I've seen. In that sense, it's arguably the truest successor to the original. It's an inferior sequel, but how could it be anything else? We're now 9 films in, and none of them have touched the greatness of the original. Once regarded as the low point in the franchise, Part 4 now sits comfortably in the middle. In retrospect, it plays less as a travesty and more as a prophecy, warning us of the flood of sequels, remakes, reboots, and reimaginings that would come with the turn of the 21st century. The film industry ignored that warning. But at least Kim Henkel is getting paid.
All right.
He deserves it after everything he's been through.